Welcome back to MidPoint. Retired U.S. Army General, author of the new book, Don't Wait for the Next War, A Strategy for American Growth and Global Leadership. Pleasure once again to speak with General Wesley Clark. General, with regard to ISIS, we seem to be involved in a conflict that will launch us into another war just like Iraq, just like Afghanistan, stick us there for 20, 30 years or more. What you're proposing in the book, can anything of what you're proposing be done to stop that in its tracks, or has this machine already been put in an irrevocable forward gear?
I don't think it's irrevocable, but I do think we have to do this. It's okay to use ground power in certain restricted instances. For example, if you have to send a raid in and take out a terrorist leader, then take him out. But no more big invasions of the region with U.S. forces against ISIS, because ISIS is a religiously motivated group of zealots. What they want is U.S. forces on the ground. That's a big recruiting draw for them. They'd love to say they could kill the infidels. So what we want to do is use air power. We want to use the local forces, the coalition's ground forces, and most importantly, we have to establish governance in the regions that are freed up. That means the Iraqi government has to become a legitimate government. And in Syria, if we don't want Bashar al-Assad back in, we have to work with the Free Syrian movement, the Syrian opposition, and give them some territory to work on. And they have to call it Free Syria and defend it.
All right, now, General, and again, I'm not a military expert. I only play one on TV occasionally. So let me ask you on the three things that you talked about right here. Air power, all the experts say it cannot work by itself. You have to have troops on the ground. Wait a minute. Local troops, we already have seen them. They're not good enough. Let's be very frank here. They just can't get the job done, so we can't rely on them. And local government, that's even worse. These guys can't decide who sits at the edge of a table here. So how then can we do any of this if all three of the things that you've just talked about simply don't work without American forces on the ground?
Well, I think we've got to recognize that it's not going to unfold on our timetable. So the local forces, they can work. I mean, after all, ISIS is local forces. It's not that people from this part of the region can't fight. They're not fighting on, they're fighting tough on ISIS side. People on the other side could fight just as tough if they're trained and motivated and well led. That's the problem for the countries in the region. Look, this region's undergoing an enormous stress as part of a 300-year-long effort of Islam to accommodate to Western technology and the modernization of the West. When Islam got started, the West was in the Dark Ages, and Islam was the center of civilization. They can't understand why, if they're God's people, that the West is more powerful. And all of this is one way or another related to that. So we're not going to stop that with U.S. forces, whether we put forces on the ground or not. We've got to do what's required to protect America at home, maintain our interests as best we can, and avoid the kind of destructive, damaging commitments like Iraq and Afghanistan that have hurt America's standing in the world and reduced our power to take action and lead elsewhere.
I've got about 2 minutes left, and you mentioned protect America at home. Right now, that comes down to the Ebola crisis, which we are facing here, and the military is involved in this. Do you, and two-part question here, do you agree with having a czar, and certainly a politically motivated individual as a czar? And what about sending troops over to Western Africa to care for this, American troops who are put in harm's way?
Well, of course, I know Ron Klain, and he's a very bright guy. And somebody has to coordinate the efforts. It was too much for the National Security Council staff. That was clear. So Ron Klain knows Washington, and this is a Washington job as well as it's an Atlanta job and a disease job, and he can get all the medical expertise. So I hope Ron's the right guy for the job. I'm glad there's somebody in charge. Now, with respect to Africa, of course, my heart goes out to those troops that are going over there. I'm worried to death about them. But I think that if got good leadership and the right policies or sensible policies are followed, we should be able to pull that off. And the military can do these things. It doesn't have to only fix bayonets and charge the hill. We've got a lot of very well-trained, disciplined, motivated people in the armed forces who can pitch in emergency, provide humanitarian assistance. That's what this is.
General, would you, about 30 seconds we have left here, look the president in the eye and say, shut down the air travel from Africa? It's the right thing to do.
Well, at this point, I would go to the people who are monitoring and working the air traffic. What I think we need is a better means of detecting Ebola. So shutting down the air traffic, not yet perhaps, but a better means of detecting who might be carrying the virus other than having a 99.5 or 100.4 fever. Yes, we desperately need that, and that's a technical problem first. So right now, I would not shut down the air traffic, but I would demand a better means of screening air passengers.
It is another war we fight. The book again is Don't Wait for the Next War, a strategy for American growth and global leadership. It has been a pleasure to speak with General Wesley Clark. General, thank you so much for your time. I will look forward to the next time.
Thank you.
All right, later on this hour, the mysterious death of an Iranian broadcaster covering the Middle East.